Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Any better? How about this? Oh my God, I have had some technical problems today. I apologize, crowd. My whole system just shut down right in front of me. Makes me look like I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. Goodness me. All right, so the exam. Good God, for like the third time today. Exam 1 is this week. We are going to be, and I do apologize for the technical details. Exam 1 is this week. It'll be available Friday morning at 6 a.m. It will be due Sunday night by 11:59 p.m. It'll be somewhere between 50 and 60 questions. They'll be in the same format as your homework, short answer, multiple choice, and matching questions. You'll have you'll have exactly 60 minutes to complete the exam. You must complete it all in one setting, and no, you are not supposed to use your books, notes, and other study materials. Hopefully that explains the exam. That's this week. It's going to cover chapters 1 through 4. Now don't forget, your homework and your weekly discussion are still due, just like they're due every week. So this is going to be a heavy week for work in this class. Just make sure you plan accordingly. Okay? So, any questions about the exam? I sent an announcement around this morning in your email and on Blackboard with instructions for this week's activities in case you need a reminder. So don't hesitate to go to your email or the announcements page of Blackboard if you need this information again. Okay? Sorry, let's go ahead and get started. Chapter 4. So this is the chapter we're going to read about developmental psychology. That's another modern subfield of psychology. You can become a developmental psychologist. There is a PhD degree, and that is an official job title that you can have. Okay, and so that's what we're going to be talking about this week. And developmental psychologists are all about how human beings change as they move across the lifespan from conception to death. Now, the weird thing is your developmental psychology is going to be a little broader than regular psychology. A lot of people are interested in developmental science. So anthropologists, sociologists, biologists, medical doctors, lots of people are going to join developmental psychologists in trying to understand human development. Okay, am I blurry to anyone? I see Christine saying it's blurry. I'm looking at my screen and everything looks pretty clear. Okay, so maybe it's just you this morning, Christine, low bandwidth or something. So we're going to be talking about how human beings change over the course of the lifespan. Today we're going to focus on the biological aspects of development. So it's actually going to sound a little bit like biology class in here for a few minutes. And then we're going to focus on cognitive and language milestones today. And then we're going to talk about social development tomorrow or Thursday in Thursday's class. Okay? So why are we interested in lifespan development? Why should we care? Because you know what? It allows us to live longer, healthier, happier lives. I don't know if you knew this, but in 1900, the average lifespan here in the United States was 47 years of age. That means that half of your classmates would be dead by the age of 47. Think about that high school class you graduated with. Those are all the people who are the same age as you, your cohort, if you will. Can you imagine a world in which half of them were already dead by the age of 47? That's 1900. Now, shoot forward to the year 2000, the average lifespan is 79. That is to say, your half of your classmates will live to be at least 79 years of age. That's 32 years worth of improvement in 100 years. Exactly, Amber. Your time would be up. My time would be up. Can you imagine that? And so what's happened is learning about how human beings develop, what they need to develop healthy and happy, healthily and happily, has really improved the longevity. And in fact, they say in 2030, in some parts of the world, the average lifespan will even be as high as 90. And you know what? We're not just talking about health, too. We're talking about well-being. I'm not just saying living a long life. I'm talking about living a long, happy life where you're active, intellectually engaged, and socially engaged. Okay, so we're not just interested in living a long life, but in living a long, good life. Now, lifespan development, as we're going to define it, is a multidisciplinary study of how people change over the course of the lifespan. All right, and we're going to focus on developmental scientists spend a lot of time trying to figure out one major question. Is our development a product of our genetic instructions, or is it a product of our environment? So look in the mirror, or look at your children, look at your parents, and ask yourself, how did they get to be that way? Did you just change and develop into the adults you are because of your genetic instructions? Did you mature based upon some sort of natural qualities about you? Or are you the product of who you are because of your environment? So let's think about language development. How do we learn language? Is it programmed in the brain and it automatically comes out? Or is it a product of the environment you live in? That is to say, if you were brought up in an environment without language, would your language ability develop at all? So what causes us to become the adults we are? Is it nature or is it our nurture? And if you look right underneath me, one of the ways in which we think about human development is we think about it as happening on different trajectories, okay? So people aren't just changing physically. Yes, you grow taller, you go through puberty, you get wrinkles, amber. Now that you're our age, you may get muscle stiffness and aches and pains and other stuff. We change physically as we get older, but you know what? We also change intellectually as we get older. Think about the 2-year-old that you saw the other day and compare that with a 12-year-old. How does a 2-year-old think differently than a 12-year-old? For those of you who are my age now in middle age, compare the way you think now to the way you thought when you were 17 or 18 years of age. Did your intellectual abilities change? And then we can think about change along a third dimension, socio-emotional or personality development. How does our personality evolve and change as we get older? If any of you have kids, you know that children can be emotionally uncontrolled in their 1s and 2s. They don't have very good emotional control. And one of the things that we tried to teach them was how to control their emotions. And so 13s and 14-year-olds are a little better with emotional control. But you know what? They can still get a little hysterical sometimes. And now that you're adults, hopefully you've learned how to control your emotions. So we can think about human beings, emotions and personality, their intellectual abilities and their physical abilities as 3 different dimensions that develop as we grow older. All right. So in order to make people live longer, healthier, happier lives, we have to understand their physical needs, their cognitive needs, and their socio-emotional needs as they develop and mature. What sort of physical things does a 2-year-old need? What sort of intellectual things does a 5-year-old need? What sort of socio-emotional things should you give your teenagers so they develop in a healthy way, so they unfold in a good way? So that's sort of what the developmental psychology and developmental sciences are all about, or lifespan development is all about. So what I'm going to talk about today are physical development and cognitive development. I'm going to have to run through this pretty quickly. So hopefully I don't speed along too fast. If I lose you, please don't hesitate to ask a question in the chat bar. So here's the deal. One of the reasons that our lifespan is so long now compared to 1900 is because we lose far fewer children during the first year of life. You probably don't know this, but you are most likely to die. You're more likely to die during the first year of your life than you are for the next 40 years of your life, 40 or 45 years of your life. The most dangerous time to be alive is from birth until 1 year of age. And infant mortality really decreases the average lifespan. So one of the ways in which we've really bumped up average lifespan is by decreasing the number of children that live that die within the first year. And largely, that's a function of knowing what's happening before children are born, so that they're not born with birth defects, so that they're not born with problems, so that they're not born with sicknesses that are going to kill them the first year. So the important thing to do is to know what happens in the prenatal period, because the mother's behavior can affect this developing baby. So the prenatal development, after you are conceived, this little developing organism in the mom's belly goes through three prenatal stages of development. During the first week or two, this little organism is fertilized and goes from an egg in a sperm cell to a zygote. And this little zygote turns into a blastula, a ball of cells, and it floats down the fallopian tube and embeds in the uterine wall. And that happens during the germinal phase. And the baby's most likely to have a miscarriage here. The mom's likely to have a miscarriage, and just the pregnancy will be terminated if there's a problem during this stage. Now, from week 3 to about week 8, what's going to happen is this little ball of cells that's implanted in the uterine wall is going to start developing a spine. This little thing on the back of the blastula is going to start to fold in on itself and become a neural groove. And this neural groove is going to fold in and close and become a little neural tube. And that neural tube is going to become a brain. Now, from week 2 to 8, the nervous system's going to develop, the placenta and the umbilical cord's going to mature and develop as a support system, and then all of the organs of the baby are going to start to develop, and this is called organogenesis, right? Now, if you look at this chart underneath me, it's going to sort of show you the 3 stages of prenatal development. And what you're going to see is a bar representing when an organ begins to develop and when it finishes developing. And what I want you to notice is the middle category is the embryonic period. And I want you to see that all of the different parts of the organism begin to develop during this stage. The central nervous system, the heart, the arms, the eyes, the legs, the teeth, all the ears. All of these structures are going to begin to develop from 3 to 8 weeks. Now, a baby during this problems during this particular period could lead to miscarriage. However, if the mom ingests something damaging or teratogenic to the baby might have birth defects. Maybe an organ won't grow properly or won't grow at all. All right, and then the third stage of development you see from 8 weeks to birth is what's known as the fetal period. And this is when most of the weight gain occurs and most of the baby's organ systems will develop. Now, all of these systems will be done by birth with the exception of one. Your nervous system is not complete when you are born. How long does it take a nervous system to fully mature? About 25 years. Those of you out there in YouTube land, if you are not 25 years old, your brain is not done developing yet. And we can talk about how that develops a little bit later on. Okay, so here's the deal. Why do we care about the embryonic period and the fetal period? Because there are these chemicals that can pass through the mother's protective system and get into the baby's blood system. And these chemicals can sometimes harm the babies. Environmental substances that can harm prenatal development are called teratogens, and their effects are called teratogenic effects. Now, in the placenta, there's sort of a filter that protects the baby from a lot of molecules that might be in the mother's blood system. However, teratogenic molecules are small enough that they can pass through this maternal blood barrier. They diffuse into the baby's blood system, and they can cause harmful effects to whatever's happening. Now, If you take a teratogen during the embryonic period, the body part that's affected may not even grow. So there are examples of what they call thalidomide babies from the 1960s whose moms took this very dangerous substance prescribed by a doctor in England for about 3 months. And when the mothers took it, it would stop limbs from growing. So there are babies who were born with arms that didn't finish growing or legs that didn't finish growing. Some babies had hands that were just attached right to their shoulders. Instead of having arms, they just had hands. And so a teratogenic substance during the embryonic period can actually stop the organ from growing so it doesn't grow properly. On the other hand, if you take a teratogen during the fetal period, the organ may have fully formed, but its functioning may not turn out right. It may not function properly. So what determines the impact of a teratogen? Well, the amount of the teratogen, of course, the dose, of course, the genetic susceptibility of the baby, but also the timing when the teratogenic substances is ingested by the mother. What kind of things are we talking about with teratogens? Well, nicotine, drugs, alcohol, prescription medication, acne medication. In fact, if you're pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant, it's important to tell the doctor all of the medications, supplements, vitamins, etc. you are taking. Of course, it's not safe to engage in illegal or recreational drug use, and all of these things can be should be taken into consideration if you want your baby to be born healthy and not have a higher risk of dying during that first year of life. Now, it turns out another teratogenic factor, bizarrely enough, it's not only chemicals. There are other factors, qualities of the mom that can affect the health of the baby. Did you know that that being a teen mother is a teratogenic factor? It is a risk factor for an unhealthy baby. Not to make judgments of anybody, babies are always happy times, and teenage moms are just as cool as 30-year-old moms. But the problem is teenage moms are more likely to give birth to low birth weight children. A lot of times these teen moms will be in situations where they don't get the kind of prenatal care that they need, and they won't take care of themselves the way they need. And so you're more likely to have a low birth weight baby. Moms also, and if younger girls are going to be thinner, and you need a certain amount of body fat weight to support this developing baby. So teen mothers are more likely to have low birth weight babies. And a low birth weight baby is a baby who's born at less than 5.5 pounds at birth. Normal birth weight is considered somewhere between 7 and 9 pounds. A baby born at 5.5 pounds is considered low birth weight. Now, low birth weight babies tend to have breathing problems. They tend to have heart problems and other medical conditions that lead to a higher rate of death during that first year of life. And you know what? Not only is it more likely to affect their physical health, but these children are also more likely to have developmental delays, intellectual disabilities, and academic and behavioral problems in school. So it actually turns out if a mom has an opioid addiction, what they will do during pregnancy a lot of times is just use a maintenance drug, and I forget that one, methadone. They'll put the mom on methadone. Rather than making her quit chemicals cold turkey, it actually turns out that it's less harmful for a baby to be born with a methadone addiction than it is to be born low birth weight. If you make a mother quit opioids cold turkey, the shock to the system is likely to make the baby be born early. And these low birth weight babies have longer term problems than if you have a baby that is slightly addicted for several days. In fact, if anybody's interested, I've actually got some videos on this very topic. I talk about it in my developmental psych class because it's a little counterintuitive. Amber has a Casey that was addicted to opioids at birth. His home is, he's 7 now, his home life is terrible. That's a sad situation. That's a bummer. Dibishat, she didn't know she was pregnant. The baby is fine somehow. Right, Hoor. I'll answer both those questions. Having a teratogenic substance doesn't necessarily mean the baby's going to be harmed. There are a lot of factors: dose, genetic susceptibility, timing, and just plain stupid luck. Sometimes that works too, right? That we don't call that a scientific factor, but sometimes you just get lucky. And that is shameful. I mean, that is a bummer. Amber, and you're talking about the baby being born addicted. It turns out that there's not as many long-term consequences for being born addicted to an opioid substance. The baby can get over that. It's that low birth weight that is more problematic in the long term. However, getting over that addiction is going to presuppose that the baby is brought up in a nurturing, good environment after the fact. But it sounds to me, Amber, like it's not happening for that baby, and I am so sorry. And I know you'd like to get involved and help, but it's just tough. And the things that are going to happen based on this poor environment. Actually, Amber, for all of you, we're talking about early childhood experiences on development. And I've got this week's video is about a concept called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And there's a lady who has found a way to evaluate the amount of adverse childhood experiences that we experience and can use it to predict your health and the longevity in your life. You're going to find this talk absolutely amazing. And Amber, you will find it of specific interest. Okay? Now, so that's what happens before the child's born. Now, I suggested to you that the nervous system doesn't finish developing until you're 25 years of age. That's amazing. And really, the change from 0 to 2 years is absolutely astounding. Your brain is going to be almost 90% of its adult size by 2 years of life, and you are still going to be walking around at 2.5 feet tall. So think about it. You're a third of your normal height at 2 years of age, and yet your brain is almost completely done. So your brain is not done at birth, and it just explodes for the first 2 years. That's why the first 2 years are so important. That's why we feed our children whole milk instead of 2% milk, because that extra fat is good for their developing brain. And what's really important during the first couple of years of life is this brain developing. If it develops normally and unfolds properly, it really sets the stage for a lot of normal development for the rest of your life. But problems with neurological development during the first 2 years can really be detrimental to a child's life. So what neurological changes occur during these first couple of years? Now, if you'll remember on the last slide, I talked about nature and nurture. You know what? It turns out that it's not nature or nurture, but it's both of them. And in fact, I can demonstrate that by in explaining to you how the brain changes over the first few years of life. Now, the first thing I'm going to actually talk about, I'm going to start with the bottom of this graph and talk about maturational processes. You know what your brain is missing when you are born? It's missing fat. It's missing a ton of fat. There's this fatty tissue that grows along your axons. Does anybody remember what the name of that tissue that grows along your axons and insulates your neurons? Does anybody know what the name of that tissue that grows on the outside of axons is? I'm going to give you a second to see if anybody can type that in. Oh, excuse me. It's myelin tissue. It's myelin tissue. It's written up here on the board. Okay, now here's the deal. In order to get that brain through the birth canal, the brain, something has to be left out of the brain. But what's not left out of the brain are all the modules, all the circuits, and all the neurons that you have. All those are already in your brain at birth. What's missing is the fatty tissue, the insulation on your axons. And so over the first 25 years of your life, this myelination is going to grow in a programmed manner. Environment doesn't affect your myelination. The only thing that affects the myelination is if the baby doesn't get enough fat. That's why we suggest a high fat content for a baby. And the baby's body turns this fat into myelin tissue that helps insulate these neurons. Now, it occurs in a very programmed fashion. It turns out that the back part of your brain myelinates before the front part of your brain. The back part of your brain controls your vision, so your vision matures first as a baby. Your motor cortex and your sensory cortex and your parietal cortex are going to myelinate before your frontal lobe. So your sense of moving your body, feeling your body, and knowing where you are in space are going to mature before your frontal lobe. The last part of your brain to myelinate is going to be this frontal lobe and this abstract thinking ability in the back of your brain. Your frontal lobe controls your personality, and this back part of your parietal lobe controls your critical thinking ability. And down here at the bottom is your memory. So what's going to develop is your ability to control and feel your body and your vision. They're going to mature first. And then your ability for critical thinking, remembering, and personality are going to mature last. And so as these abilities mature, as the myelin tissue grows, these abilities are going to mature. So why does a 2-year-old cry so much? Because they can't control their emotion. The part of their body that controls their emotion isn't matured yet. If you've ever tried to teach a 4-year-old something, they're not really good at remembering things, so they're not ready for school yet. And we usually wait till children's temporal lobes begin to mature before we start them in formal education. And we don't learn calculus and other abstract mathematical sciences until we get into high school, because our parietal lobe isn't mature yet. So do you see how these areas mature based on programmatic change? And as they change, these abilities that we have begin to come online, begin to mature. Now, it turns out that your frontal lobe doesn't finish mature until you're 25 years of age. And this is why sometimes your 17 and 18-year-old selves didn't make such great decisions, because you weren't thinking about the consequences of your behavior. One of the things that makes teenagers is that they do impetuous things. Sometimes they do things without thinking, right? They do make rash decisions. And so that's the maturation part of your brain development. It takes over 25 years. Now, what's the learning part, or the nurture? That's what that involves a different part of the neuron. If you remember, we were talking about the neuron, and I suggested to you the axon is that long root-like structure, and then you have a cell body and you have dendrites around that cell body. And the dendrites are sensitive to chemical stimulation. Well, here's the crazy thing. As one neuron stimulates another neuron, the neuron that's being stimulated releases chemicals that cause the first neuron to start growing like roots. Think of it as fertilization. When one neuron stimulates another neuron, the neuron that's being stimulated fertilizes the first neuron, and it causes the dendrites to sort of grow. It starts to grow more dendrites, just like more roots. Now, if you look at the picture in the far left-hand bottom corner, what you're going to see are several neurons at birth. And then at 6-year-old, what that picture at 6-year-old represents is the same neurons as at birth, but now they have more connections between the neurons. They've innervated each other. These dendrites have grown out and spread just like roots do, and they've made a lot of connections. Okay, and this is what we would call synaptic blooming. And as you use your brain grows together in the areas in which you are using it. So it starts to build connections. Now, the nifty thing that happens is your brain sculpts itself to the neural pathways that you use. So when you two neurons are communicating, they're going to make a bunch of different pathways. but only some of those pathways are going to be really efficient. The other ways are going to be inefficient. And so what's going to happen is some of these neural pathways are going to, your brain's going to stop using them, and they're going to die off. They're going to prune away. And so what happens is as you stimulate a brain, it's going to make more connections than it possibly needs, and it's going to find out which of those connections works the quickest, and that's the connections it's going to really strengthen into very strong connections. And the neural connections that it makes that don't work so well together are going to die off. And so what you're going to see is blooming and pruning in your cytoarchitecture. Your neurons are going in your neural architecture. Your brain's going to knit itself together, and then parts of these connections are going to die off as it finds out which pathways between your language center and your motor center, which pathway works the most efficiently. Which pathway between your language center and your memory center works most effectively. And it's going to prune away those paths that don't work as well. Now, in order for these neural pathways to grow, you need to be stimulated. And during these times when stimulation is necessary are called critical periods of your development. It turns out that there's a critical period for language. In order to learn language, we all have the ability or the potential to learn language as long as we are exposed to it. So no matter what you do, you will be able to learn at least one language as long as you hear that language during the first 4 or 5 years of your life. If you're not exposed to language in the first 4 or 5 years of your life, that part of your brain will find something else to do, and you won't be able to learn how to speak language. There are visual critical periods. There are emotional critical periods. There are all kinds of critical periods when you need certain environmental experiences to grow the circuits that control your normal functioning. Now, the neat thing about the brain, and we talked about this a little bit maybe last week or a couple weeks ago, is the idea of neuroplasticity. These neurons are always growing, and this synaptic change is an ongoing process. Every time you use parts of your brain, these parts of your brain are, the dendrites are growing towards one another. And so what happens if part of your brain is damaged, a different part of your brain can grow in make the connections that damaged part of your brain needed and can actually take over the functions of damaged parts of your brain. We call this ability of the brain to respond to environmental challenges and to neurological insults as neuroplasticity. The brain is flexible and can actually rewire itself in cases of brain damage. Next week, when we look at Ben Underwood, the blind boy that can see with his ears, this is exactly what happened. He lost his eyes, and so his visual center wasn't getting any input from his eyes, so the visual center neurons grew, and he had a neuroplastic response, and his hearing area and his vision area wired together, and now he can echolocate. He can use sonar with his ears to create a picture of the visual world. So these are sort of the changes that are occurring during the first couple of years of your life. Okay? Is this making sense? Now, here's the deal. We can't actually see this, but we are very interested in understanding whether or not this neurological development is happening in a normal fashion. If it isn't, we know that we can use the principle of neuroplasticity to rewire your brain and hopefully fix you if you have neurological problems. But we have to know you have a neurological problem first. And so doctors have developed a system using milestone behaviors to help evaluate the health of your developing baby. And so a milestone is the easiest way to identify if your child's neurological development is happening normally. If you have a child and you have been to a pediatrician, your pediatrician has evaluated your child's milestones. They may do that through just simple conversations where they're asking you what the baby's doing, and you may think you're just making conversation about small talk about what your baby's doing, but your doctor is actually looking to hear if your baby is engaging in milestone behaviors. What is a milestone behavior? That is a behavior that any child with normal neurological development should be able to do. And it turns out that based upon your child's age, there are certain behaviors that they should be able to do. And as they're developing, they should be adding more and more behaviors that they can do. So these milestone behaviors are a clue as to whether or not your baby's brain is developing normally. If you look underneath me, this is a milestone chart for what we would call the gross motor milestones that occur during the first year of life. A gross motor behavior is any behavior that involves large muscles of your body, like your leg muscles, like your trunk muscles, like your neck muscles. We're going to differentiate those from fine motor behaviors, which are motor behaviors that involve really small muscles, like your fingers, like your eyes, like your lips. Those involve really small muscles, okay? And so what you're going to notice looking at this chart is that typically children should be able to lift their head and move their neck around 2 months of age. Children should be able to roll over sometime around 3 to 4 months of age. Children should be able to sit up and balance themselves by around 4 months of age. Your child should actually be able to stand up on their 2 legs and hold themselves up at around 6 months of age. Typically, we think that children start crawling sometime between 9 and 11 months of age. And you know what? Most children are going to be able to balance themselves and will start taking their first step right around their first year of age. And so doctors watch for the progression of these milestone behaviors. Now, here's the deal, just like some people are always late to dinner, and some people are always late to work, some people are always late on their milestones. And so doctors really don't get hung up if your child is running a month or 2 later than all of the other children, as long as they're continuing to progress through milestones. So maybe your baby lifts their head at 3 months and rolls over at 4.5 months and stands up at 7 months and walks holding on to something at 11 months and doesn't take their first step until 13 months. As long as they're continuing to progress, the doctor feels pretty comfortable about the baby. What they are not looking for and what's going to cause them concern is if your baby stops making milestones altogether, or some babies even regress backwards and start losing milestone behaviors. This happens with the socio-emotional milestones that predict autism. So your baby should progress through social milestones too as they get older, and they're going to give their first social smile. They're going to smile voluntarily about 3 months. Then they're going to start paying attention to their caregiver in about 4 months. Or a little bit younger, they're going to find their caregiver interested. So there's a progress of social milestones. What you'll see with kids who have autism is they'll stop progressing through these social milestones. And this is an early clue to your pediatrician that your kid might have autism or some other social disorder. And so what milestones do doctors look at? Well, they look at your gross motor milestones and your fine motor milestones, but they also look at your cognitive milestones. Your kids should be able to engage in intellectual things, socio-emotional milestones, and there are actually language milestones. And all of these milestones just provide your doctor with a way to manage your child's neurological development and to monitor it and to make sure that your baby is developing normally. And the neat thing is, the earlier we can identify a developmental delay, the earlier we can begin putting in therapeutic treatments, and the more we can take advantage of this plasticity, of this brain plasticity to overcome childhood delays and to give children the best possible outcomes. Does that make sense? Do you see how we can use these physical clues to sort of come up with ideas about how healthy our child's developing? And you know what? You can look at language development milestones. You can look right underneath me. There's a critical period for language. And in fact, if any of you are interested, I think in your course resources folder, there's the crazy case of Jeannie Wiley. She was a girl from California who was brought up in seclusion by her crazy father for the first 12 years of her life. He kept her locked in a bedroom, never let anybody talk to her, and fed her through a hole in the door and made her sleep in a dog cage. The cops found out and arrested him and rescued her when she was 12, and they tried to teach Jeannie how to speak. And it turns out that she had missed the critical period, and so Jeannie never learned how to speak like a normal adult, demonstrating this idea that language has a critical period. Now, what are the milestones of interest? If you've ever been around kids, you'll notice that they babble and coo. That's the first thing they do is they make these cute little gurgling baby sounds. And then typically they're going to say their first word sometime around 12 months of age. Depending upon whether or not the mom and dad take care of the kid and don't let the kid need for anything. Sometimes kids won't start speaking because mom and dad are taking such good care of them, right? First word usually comes around 12 months. Kids are actually going to start saying their first sentences around 18 to 24 months, and this is called telegraphic speech. They'll put together really rudimentary sentences during the second year of life. And sometime during the second half of the second year of life, your kid's going to go from saying 3 and 4 and 5 words to all of a sudden they'll wake up and it's like one day they've learned another 100 words. And they're going to have what's known as the vocabulary explosion. And then from 3 to 5 years, your child's going to learn how to be a good conversational partner, how to give and take in a conversation, how to tailor your conversation to what the other person knows or doesn't know, and how to know what kinds of things shouldn't be said in a polite conversation. We call all of those conversational abilities pragmatics. And so just like physical milestones, you're going to see children go through language milestones. And there are cognitive milestones and there are socio-emotional milestones. Okay. Christine Maria doesn't see it in the course resources. You know what, Christine? Give me 5 minutes after class and I will have that. I will have it uploaded to the course resources folder. You don't see course resources? Oh, it should be in chapter 3. If you look in the chapter folder, you should see it in the chapter folder. So go to week 3 lesson, and at the top of each lesson folder, there is a short course resources, a resources folder. And that'll usually be the interesting videos that go along with that week. So look in there, Christine. If it's not in there, I'll put it in there after class. Okay? Now, cognitive development. Oh my goodness, I'm running out of time, but let's talk a little bit about intellectual development. Okay, where does intellectual ability come from? How do we go from human beings that know nothing, and if you've ever been around an infant, they know diddly squat. How do you go from nothing to the brilliant students that I see sitting out there in YouTube? How do you go from not knowing anything and having nothing but reflexes to being able to do calculus, chemistry, and nursing? How do we go from 0 to 60? The first person to suggest a theory of that was a Swiss psychologist named Jean Piaget. And what I'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about his classic theory of intellectual development. He was one of the first developmental psychologists in that he was the first to give an explanation about how the mind unfolded. Okay? And he called his theory genetic epistemology. And basically that means the genetic or the biological unfolding of knowledge. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that relates to knowledge. So his theory was basically the genetic development of knowledge. And he argued that human minds developed through this process of accommodation and assimilation. Now, what he argued was that human beings developed these really simple plans called schemes, which are a set of mental representations that help understand and interact with the world, and that these schemes change through experimentation and become more complex. What exactly are you talking about, Chris? Here's the deal. What are humans born with? Humans are born with reflexes. That's what we're born with. And so any basis of knowledge has to start with reflexes. If you put something in a baby's mouth, it will suck it. That is an adaptive reflex that the baby has. If you put something in a baby's hand, the baby will grab it. That is a reflex that a baby is born with. And what Piaget argued was that over the first couple of months of life, your baby realizes that these reflexes are useful. So your baby starts putting things in its mouth, and it realizes that when it puts a bottle or a breast in its mouth, it makes the baby feel good. And the baby develops a very simple representation called a scheme. Hey, putting stuff in my mouth is good. Or when your baby holds things in their hands and shakes them, they make a really nifty sound like a rattle, and the baby enjoys that sound. And so the baby learns, if I have something in my hand, if I shake it, it sounds good and I enjoy that. And so what Piaget argued was that these reflexes, the baby realizes that these reflexes lead to good outcomes and develops a very simple set of schemes, okay? And Piaget then argues that the baby takes these schemes and just like a scientist, tries them out in their world and finds that sometimes these schemes work and sometimes these schemes don't work. And wherever they work, your baby assimilates that scheme to be used in that situation. And wherever your baby finds out that that scheme doesn't work, your baby accommodates to that situation and learns to try something different. What exactly are you saying, Chris? Let me give you a great example. When my son CJ was about 10 months of age, he said his first words. He spoke at a really young age, and his first word was dog, doggo. And we would point at our dog. We had a little furry Yorkshire Terrier, and he would call it doggo. And we used to laugh and reward him and pat him on the head. And he learned that this four-legged furry thing was a doggo. And so whenever we would take him over to a friend's house, he would point at their four-legged furry thing and say doggo. And we went over to our friend's house, and they had a big dog, and he pointed at it and said doggo. And we laughed and said, good job, CJ. And then we went over to a friend's house that had a schnauzer, and he pointed at that fine-haired dog with the short hair and said doggo. And we laughed and said, good job, CJ. And so he learned to assimilate that term, doggo. And he learned that dog was a lot of four-legged furry creatures. We then took him over to our friend's house who liked cats. And they had cats in their house. And you know what CJ said when he walked in the door? You know what he did when he walked in the door? Somebody tell me what he did. He pointed to that little furry animal, and you know what he said? He said, doggo, right? Absolutely. And we all laughed and said, no, CJ, doggies go bark, bark. Cats go meow. And so he learned to accommodate his scheme. He learned that the scheme that he had, that dogs were a four-legged furry thing, was wrong. And he had to change it a little bit. He accommodated that schema. And so according to Piaget, we start with reflexes that we turn into these real simple schemes. And then we experiment with these schemes and we assimilate them wherever they work. And we change them wherever they don't work. And he argues that this creates, if you will, knowledge structures in our mind. Now, Piaget argued, oh my God, I have so run out of time. You know what? I have run out of time today. Did he call the cat Catu? Very funny. No, eventually he learned that it was better to call the doggo a dog. Very funny point, John, a Catu. That's pretty funny. I like that. You know what? I have run out of time. So what I'm going to have to do is talk. Piaget, before I let you go, Piaget argued that these schemes change and our mind evolves through 4 stages. I ran out of time and I didn't get to talk to that. So what I'm going to do on Thursday is I'm going to start by talking about the 4 stages of cognitive development: the sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the formal operational stage. And so Piaget argued if you look at children at different ages, a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 20-year-old, you will see that they have 4 fundamentally different ways of seeing the world. And we're going to talk about these different ways of seeing the world on Thursday in class, okay? I am sorry I ran out of time and I spent too much time with technical difficulties at the beginning of the broadcast. I am so sorry for my cutting the broadcast off and for cutting my microphone off. I was doing some experimentation before class and I goofed up, okay? Yes, and a study guide. All right, the weekly outcomes, the weekly learning outcomes in each chapter are your study guide, April. So if you go look in the week 4 lessons, you'll notice that there are course outcomes in the top of this chapter. Those represent the study guide for the first exam. Also on Friday, I will be having a review session at 9 a.m. Friday morning on YouTube, and I will be recording this review session to help you for the exam. Okay? So is that all right? The study guide and the review session. Fantastic. Okay, cool. All right, class, I'm going to let you go now. It is 9:51. Have a great day. I hope to see you in webinar on Wednesday night. If I don't see you in webinar on Wednesday night, I will hope to see you in class on Thursday morning. And thanks to everybody for coming and participating. It was great to see you today. Thanks for those of you that shared about your children and your experiences. I thought that was very helpful. And I will definitely check to make sure that the Jeannie Wiley video is in the resources folder for week 3. Everybody, take care, have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.